Welcome and happy Mother's Day to all the mothers and grandmothers and stepmothers among us, as well as to all those who just gift us with that loving mother energy. I hope you have a fabulous Mother's Day and a wonderful weekend and year. Thank you so much for all the love that you give. So my talk today and our theme this month is called Your 12 Steps. Okay, now I know when you hear that, or I'm guessing when you hear that, you took the reference to be to AA 12-Step Program, which is a fabulous program, and we are going to talk about that in 2 weeks. We're going to hear the insight and the wisdom of Asha Lightbearer as she talks about that 12-step program. But that is not my topic this week. The reason I use the image of steps to describe the whole monthly theme is because this month I want to explore the process of moving forward, specifically the steps we take as we structure our own spiritual paths. Here at One World we know, and we know it from our own lived experience, that our unfolding and our deepening is a very intentional process. The key words are awareness and choice. In our world today, we have the amazingly good fortune to be able to learn about the processes and the steps that so many sages throughout history have taken. Each faith tradition we celebrate and honor here shows us how others have found ways to move beyond, to reach the heights that we as spiritual beings having a human experience can reach. We find out what others have done to find what speaks to us. And then we use that wisdom as we reflect on our own processes, where they benefit us, where we may need to change them. That's what we're doing this month. We are focusing on the process of our own awakening. So today, I'm looking at a tradition that was created for the sole reason of easing human suffering and helping us live together in communities of equity and peace. I'm talking about Buddhism, the Buddhist tradition, or as it's been called, a religion of infinite compassion. The word Buddha itself means the awakened one or the enlightened one. Houston Smith, who's the author of the foundational treatise, The World's Religions, a book I highly recommend, writes that Buddhism began with a man who simply woke up. After his enlightenment, the story goes, he was approached by a student who asked him, "Are you God?" He replied, "No." "Are you an angel?" He replied, "No." "Are you a saint?" Again, he replied, "No." And the man said, "Then what are you?" And the Buddha said, "I am awake." He tells us that while we may be asleep now, we can awaken as well. So, the basic facts of the Buddha's biography are these. He was born Siddhartha Gautama around 563 BCE in what is now Nepal, near the Indian border. His father was a king, as it was described, but it was really probably closer to a feudal lord. The story goes that when Siddhartha was born, his father summoned fortune tellers to learn and tell the baby's future. Everyone agreed that this was an unusual child, but his future was ambiguous. If he remained with the world, he would unify India and become her greatest conqueror. If, on the other hand, he stepped away from the world, he would become not a world conqueror, but a great sage and a world redeemer. So, faced with this option, his father determined to steer his son to become the great king. That was a path that was familiar to him. He knew his son would be successful. So no effort was spared to keep the prince locked into this world and worldly pleasures. He had palaces, he had dancing girls, he had every comfort imaginable. His father gave strict orders that no ugliness of any kind should intrude on his experience. He was to be shielded from contact with sickness, from death, from aging. Even when he went riding, servants were sent ahead to clear the roads of any of these sights. So, one day, when Siddhartha was in his 20s, his servants failed to catch one old man on the path, bent, unsteady, gray-haired. Siddhartha saw him and he asked, "Why does this person look like this?" And his charioteer, his companion, said, "He is old. We age." On subsequent outings, Siddhartha saw a corpse lying by the side of the road. He saw a sick man consumed with disease. He learned of illness and he learned of death. On his fourth outing, he saw a monk begging, and he learned that there are those who separate themselves from the world to seek personal and individual transformation. These experiences did not leave him. They would not leave him. He realized that all he had enjoyed, all he had pursued, would end up in decay and pain and death. It was this inescapable truth that made him despair of finding fulfillment on the physical plane. He said, "Life is subject to age and death. Where is the realm of life in which there is neither age nor death?" Once he had perceived the inevitability of decay and pain and death, he determined to liberate himself from a world that bound him to this pain. It didn't matter how much pleasure you had, how many palaces you had, how rich were your surroundings, if at the end of the day the end was going to be decline and pain and death. He looked for a way forward to a deeper truth where there is none of that. There is neither, as he put it, age nor death. So one night in his 29th year, he got up, he left his wife, his son, and his home in search of awakening. He changed his rich clothing for that of a beggar, and he simply walked away. He lived through years of searching, including 6 years as an extreme ascetic, hoping that the path to enlightenment lay through deprivation of all things physical. At one point, he was eating 6 grains of rice a day, and when he put his hand on his abdomen, he could feel his spine. This did not work. He ultimately adopted what he called the middle way, between the extremes of asceticism and indulgence. However, the practice of the middle way did not in and of itself lead to enlightenment. So, Siddhartha devoted the final phase of his journey to a combination of rigorous thought and mystic concentration, seeking to explore his conscious mind, his subconscious, and down to the deeper level of being itself, what Houston Smith has called the beyond that is within. I love that, the beyond that is within. One evening in northeast India, south of the present city of Patna, he sat down under a fig tree that became known as the Bodhi tree, or the tree of enlightenment. He sat down vowing not to arise until enlightenment was his. Gautama's meditation deepened through the night until his vision broke free, and he finally understood and saw the true nature of the universe. He saw that all is linked together in a constantly shifting and eternal pattern. All, while linked, is affected by the action of each. He saw his many lives in one unbroken continuum. He awakened from the belief in a separate state into the knowing that he was true unlimited being, that we all are true unlimited being. The ultimate reality is that the appearance of our separation into individual ego selves is simply illusion. With this awakening, he moved beyond the finality of pain and sickness and death. He became the Buddha, the awakened one. He rose from the Bodhi tree and began his teachings, which went on for the next 45 years. His focus was liberation from human suffering here and now. He taught so that others could experience what he had just realized. Now, he sometimes frustrated his followers because he had no interest in things metaphysical. He had no interest in discussing theory or theology. What happens after we die? What is God? Do we have a soul? He remained silent on these issues, no matter how much they pressed him. In refusing to discuss these theological niceties, he insisted that such discussions were not useful. And indeed, they distracted his students from the greater need to just practice the practices he taught. To his disappointed followers, who were waiting for all this metaphysical speculating, he told this parable. If a man, he said, is shot with a poisoned arrow, and a doctor is rushed to his side to save his life, would the man say, "Stop! I will not have you remove this arrow until I know who shot it and why, Who was his family and where did he come from? What caste was he from? What did he look like? Also, I need to know what this arrow is made of, how it was carved, what wood was used in its manufacture. Is it an ordinary arrow or an iron or a razor arrow? What type of bow shot it? And what was the type of bowstring? If the man waited to learn all these things, he would be dead, the Buddha said. The point is to remove the arrow and live. The first lesson the Buddha gave took place shortly after he began his travels. In that talk, he set out the essence of his teachings, known as the Four Noble Truths. These are the key to the process he gave us. The first noble truth is that life is dukkha. This is typically translated as suffering. Now, however, we tend to think of this notion as pessimistic, as if there's nothing that can be done, life is suffering, and then we're all going to die. And it's an immutable truth. Far from it. The Buddha meant that life, as most of us live it, is out of joint, dislocated, and painful. It does not have to be so. And indeed, our true nature is that it not be so. We make ourselves suffer needlessly through ignorance, through desire, and we can stop. These facts of human life, sickness, fear of death, aging, as well as desire for wealth, reputation, or earthly goods, preoccupy us. They distract us from knowing our true and joyful oneness with ultimate reality. This fact leads to the second noble truth, which is that the cause of suffering is attachment or selfish desire. We wish for wealth, for possessions, for position, but all that is going to be lost. We fear sickness, we fear death, which is going to happen. We seek those things that reinforce our ego-driven illusion of separation. These fears, these desires that bind us, are directed to our egos, to our wish for self-fulfillment. They are all about us, what we want, what we don't want, what we fear for ourselves. Whatever feeds the illusion that we are separate gives us pain, because everything we acquire can be lost and ultimately is. It's inevitable. The only truth that remains, that is never lost, is that beyond ego, all remains. True joy comes when we understand on the deepest level that the separation we see and experience is an illusion. And so we must rid ourselves of all attachments which draw us toward that illusion. The third noble truth tells us that our suffering is not inevitable. This is why Buddhism is such an optimistic tradition. It is full of hope and possibility. The Buddha was so practical. He said, this is the problem, this is the cause of the problem, it can be fixed, and this is how. We have a choice. We can live randomly and impulsively. He called this wandering about. Or we can live with purpose, concentration, and focus. If we do the latter, if we stay with it, with single-pointed mind, we will awaken. It's not easy, but the rewards are life and freedom and peace. The fourth noble truth tells us that the means to this liberation is the Eightfold Path. As the Buddha said, here is the path to the end of suffering. Tread it. The key was and is practice and persistence. So where do we start? I'm going to lay out the 8 steps with the caveat that any listing I can give in 20 minutes, now less than 20 minutes, is woefully inadequate. I encourage you to look at these wisdom teachings for yourself. There are so many resources available that share insights on the 8 Noble Path, on this wonderful teaching. Although this path is one of individual awakening, the first step is a teaching on community. This is the step we must take before we embark on the Eightfold Path. We must choose wise companions. The Buddha called this right associations. He knew that as social beings, we are so influenced by those we gather around us, they lift us up or they draw us down. We must select our community wisely. One reason why communities like One World and others are so necessary to support, to encourage, to inspire us as we move forward. The prelude, if you will, to the Eightfold Path is right association. The first step on the Eightfold Path is right view. This involves self-awareness, clarity, and reason. The Buddha emphasized that we must use our own minds, our own discernment. He gave us a system that is very suspect of authority, of those who tell us what we must think. He said, "Be your own light. Do not accept a teaching until you discover its truth for yourself through your own experience." Right view. The second step is right intent. At this point on the path, we ask ourselves, what do you want? Why are you doing what you are doing? The focus here is to make each choice one that moves us forward and does not draw us backwards. Think about all those self-improvement resolutions. I'm going to eat better, I'm going to exercise more, whatever it is. But then what happens? I can start tomorrow. If I eat this today, it'll be fine. I can always start tomorrow. Tomorrow does not come. Turn your intent into action today. It's the only way to move forward. What he meant here was that we must be persistent about what we want, and we must make every action take us toward that goal. The third step is right speech. This is a tough one. It's attention to our language. We normally don't pay much attention to our language. Our speech is such a habit, and it is so unconscious. The advice here is not to say, "I will never speak an unkind word again," because that's not going to happen. He also said it's not going deep enough. Instead, we resolve to be aware of our language, asking why we feel the need to speak an unkind word. What is moving us to speak the way we do? When we become aware, yes, it's that word again, awareness. When we become aware of our motivations, we can begin to truly change the way we engage with action. So the first step in terms of right speech is just discerning and becoming aware of what are our motivations to speak the way we do. In this way, we avoid deception. We move toward truth. Houston Smith writes that the Buddha did not condemn deception because it was immoral, that was more metaphysics, but because it diminishes us and it further separates us. We deceive, why? Because we are fearful of something. We are fearful to show our own weakness. We are fearful to show our own fear. We are concealing something about ourselves. Each time we do this, he says, we are shoring up the structure around our ego selves, which is the opposite of what we want to do for greater awakening. The same is true for gossip or unkind speech. Ask ourselves, why are we doing this? Why do we feel this motivation to speak this way? He invites us to look at our motivations and, once understood, to move beyond them. That is the way change happens. The fourth step is right conduct. This is another opportunity to look at our motivations first and understand why we behave the way we do. Am I being generous or fearful? How do I wish to show up to this relationship, this opportunity, this moment? Am I being called to change? Be aware of why we behave the way we do. The fifth step is right livelihood. Our work, our occupation, is so much of what we do in life. The Buddha cautioned that the work we select must be one that is life-affirming, that affirms the convictions by which we want to live. Today, many who focus on this step put their efforts on pursuing their livelihoods with compassion and truth and kindness, whatever your livelihood. The sixth step is right effort. Okay, so what's the teaching here? The teaching here is basically that the journey is a marathon, not a sprint. Keep your eye on the goal and move toward it firmly and steadily. Here, Houston Smith quoted the Tao Te Ching on this point. He wrote, "He who takes the longest strides does not walk farthest." Keep going. Even if you fall off the path, get back on and take the next step. Don't give up. Slow and steady is right effort, but always moving forward. The next step is right mindfulness. The practice of right mindfulness is at the heart of the Buddhist practice. The opening verse of the Dhammapada, the best known of all Buddhist scriptures, opens with, "Our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think." You're going to hear it in a minute, actually, is our reading today. Right mindfulness encourages us to see ourselves and our lives fully and clearly, here and now, and break the bonds of the ignorance and illusion that bind us. So how do we do this? How do we deepen our own mindfulness? Well, we bring an attitude of awareness and curiosity and clarity to all aspects of our lives. We can bring what the Buddhists call beginner's mind to our lives. Instead of assuming we know what's in front of us, we look at it as though we are seeing it for the first time. What is this? And we see it anew. Our consciousness, in most of us, sees so little as our minds just kind of hum along. We can see more, and this is right mindfulness. The 8th step is right concentration. When the Buddha was a child, he was taken to a festival and left for a period of time alone under an apple tree. He sat and was silent, and he found himself absorbed in contemplation. It was his first meditation experience, and he described it as a deliverance. Nothing, he taught, focuses the mind as sharply as such a practice. The story goes he was once asked, "What do you get through meditation?" The Buddha replied, "Nothing at all." And the man responded, "Then, Blessed One, what good is it?" The Buddha responded, "Let me tell you what I lost through meditation. Sickness, anger, depression, insecurity, the burden of old age, the fear of death. That is the good of meditation, which leads to nirvana." The Eightfold Path encourages us to consider how we approach life, every aspect of it, through awareness of our associations, our speech, our intent, our mind, and our actions. It invites us to deepen our understanding of ourselves. Through that door, we develop an understanding of all that is. So this week, we have some homework for Wednesday, our discussion group. Take a look at this list of the Eightfold Path and select one. Consider and practice that step between now and Wednesday. When we get together, let's discuss how that showed up for you, for us, and what lessons we can draw from the Eightfold Path. Think about as well what your own steps are and have been, what you might want to add or change. So I'd like to close with a reading by Tori Whipple from the Dhammapada. Thank you so much for listening.